We're going to do the parenting again, grandparenting, kinship care updates. This is a revision, kind of updated of a webinar that I've done for several years, talking about grandparents raising grandchildren, kinship care, which is becoming just almost as popular. Um, and it's important. Now, I put down my credentials down here, but probably the one at the end, the PLE, person with lived experience, is the most important because I've been through 3 go-rounds with guardianship with 2 different generations. It's changed over those years. The first time was 2004 when I was handed that privilege, and it is a privilege. As a grandparent, it's quite an experience, and I know that there are people on here that have had or are experiencing the same. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about some of what we know, what some of the resources are. The thing that I think is interesting right now is when you look at this field, it's growing, unfortunately, but things are changing fast, especially if you're involved with the courts with Department of Children and Family Services. Two of my go-rounds were volunteer guardianships, but the first one, which was probably the most impactful, was through DCFS. So we're just going to kind of go through that. The Illinois Family Resource Center, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I'm pretty sure, looking at the names on the attendees, that you're pretty well familiar with us. But we've been around, we're in our 12th year. Our purpose is to address substance use disorder, mental health issues, gambling disorder. And as of a couple of years ago, we've been very privileged because we were honored with the funding to develop the Circle of Care, which looks at grief as it's related to all those issues, because we know that the way grief is treated outside and inside and impacts children that have substance use disorder in their life, mental health issues, gambling disorder, is different than if mom died of cancer or dad got hurt at work or, other reasons. And the way people address it is also different. And we provide information. We don't do direct service. I did direct service for years. I ran outpatient services. And those outpatient services, interestingly enough, as I lean into looking at some of what we're going to talk about today, is the outpatient services I ran had a contract because the Our House in Charleston, Illinois holds, oh, excuse me, the contract for the Family Resource Center at that point in time, and they still do have a contract with the Department of Children and Family Services. See, it's Thursday morning at 11 o'clock, folks. Here we go. And that contract was to work with the region in providing assessments, referrals, and working through it. So in the outpatient services, I oversaw 3 different offices. There was probably, I would say, 60%, if not more, of the clients were involved with DCFS. So it's been an interesting journey. I not only bring my personal experiences that still continue to what I had and what it was like working with it back then. So, yeah, I do have the clinical side, but this is a resource center and we provide resources to the people that provide those clinical. We do a lot of work just helping people understand the importance of knowing what substance use disorder is. We're funded through the Division of Human Service, or the Department of Human Services, the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, which is into its second year now being a joined division. We do website postings. We have a Facebook page. We do webinars, and we're just finishing up our menu for webinars for this next fiscal year. And this is the first one in the year. And then we have one coming up in August, and we have a really great one called, even though the flyer on this sample to show you some of the things we're doing, family sex trafficking, the hidden ugly. Liesl, that's on here with us, is going to be delivering that, and it is a dynamite presentation, and it's an important one for you all to join us in, because this growing concern definitely impacts grandparents and kinship care, because sometimes you're almost a step away from being aware of what's really going on, and that's a step away from protecting your babes. We do technical assistance, individualized in-service presentations coming up this next year. We have 13 on our webinar menu, but we have 10 already scheduled for other organizations that want some of our webinars a little more specialized, the same topic, but to meet their needs. And so we're around to do that. We do a lot of conferences and exhibits, just like there's one in September I'll be at. There's 3 in October. And Christina will be heading down from the Chicago area to Springfield to help with the Prevent Child Abuse Conference. We're doing a presentation there. We do a lot of look at the research information. We participate on a huge, it seems like a huge, it's just a lot of statewide committees, let me put it that way. And thanks to Christina, we can provide Spanish services. You know, most of our webinars can be done in Spanish if somebody wants that. Christina's done translation for groups, and there's no charge, there's no fee for our services. And I cannot seem this summer to get rid of this throat that wants to get grouchy. What I hope to do today is really look at the research about substance misuse and the impact regarding the parents' need to be released from their parenting role. I've been on 2 different sides of that. Not that I've lost them, but when it was removed by the Department of Children and Family Services, and then when my great-grandchild was turned over voluntarily. So it's very interesting to look at the difference in the resources too. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Learn more about the issues generated for grand families and kinship care, and receive information regarding resources for grandparents and kinship and the children. And then process how this, I want you to just think about how this fits into your role and what you do. I was going to go back up and take a peek at who all was here, but I'm not going to open up the chat right now or the participants. One of the best resources, and this has been out for 2 or 3 years, but it is still one of the best overall resources, is definitely Generations United. Go to their website, just dig through their stuff. It's unreal. But they came out about 3 years ago with a 5-part series. These aren't huge books, but they're booklets, help for grandparents and kinship caregivers impacted by opioids and other substance use disorders. This material is phenomenal, and I keep going back and using it as a resource over and over again. And then they yearly do an update, not just of this, but in general, and almost always address updates to this. It's worth every minute of going and looking at that if you're interested. We know as of January 2026, there were approximately 9,500 children in DCFS care living in kinship foster homes. That means that they were involved in DCFS and placed in kinship foster homes, formal foster home care. And this came from DCFS. It was some of the latest stuff that I pulled up. This represents a significant portion of the little over 18,000 youth in DCFS care in Illinois. About 264,000 children under 18 live in households headed by a relative. This comes from the Department of Aging. Those are 2 of your really great resources to get data around kinship care and grandparents raising grandchildren. 85,000 children are raised by kin with no parent present. We know that there are many homes where there's multiple generations, but there are a lot more, or not a lot more, but there are many that don't have any parent present. And sometimes it starts out as the family moves in, and the next thing you know, the parent is just kind of missing in action. And for those grandparents in kinship, that's a blow because you just aren't prepared for that. And this is information from 2025. In 2023, for every formal child in kinship care, this is United States information. It's from Generations United. There were an estimated 10 children placed with kin outside of a formal process. And that means that if it's a formal child in kinship care, they've been placed for some reason formally through some department or something. It's not that agreement of, oh, we moved in and then pretty soon the parent's not around, or the parent took them and left them on the doorstep and said, here, you've got them. Estimated 10 children placed with kin outside of formal care. So stop and think what that does to the numbers of children that are impacted. If we stop and think about why we're here, we're just going to run through a little bit of the data. What came out last year through JAMA Pediatrics just supported so much of what we kind of knew. It came out as we were finishing up the process of developing the circle of care addressing children that are impacted by substance use disorder and mental health in a grief and loss process. And when we talk about grief, we're not talking about just death. We're talking about children that are impacted because they're removed from the home. The grief that children feel and handle and are expected to handle, by that is probably many more and much higher than if there's an actual death, because it's kind of like they're floating. I've seen these children. I've had them in my home. I've taken guardianship of them. So, I know that impact. We know that there's 19 million children who have at least one parent with a substance use disorder. 3.4 million children live with a parent with multiple, not just one. It may be alcoholism and something else. It may be marijuana and meth. It may be cocaine and alcohol. That multiple substance use disorder, which creates even more chaos. 6 million children have a parent with mental health condition and a substance use disorder. And oftentimes, looking back and thinking back as I oversaw outpatient services in a time when we were starting to see more and more growth with opioid disorders and things, that's what we started seeing as multiples rather than just one, along with the mental health condition. And 1 in 4 children live in families with a parent or caregiver suffering with an alcohol or opioid use disorder. Anymore, that is really considered about any disorder. The area that we live in, right here in central Illinois, even though heroin keeps increasing as an issue, meth, we're rural, we're farmer country back when meth started, and that's still what you'll see the primary or right up there with everything else. So we think about that. And if you have a classroom of children where there's 20 in there, 4 of those children are living in that chaos and have been impacted by that in some way. Your next door neighbor, it's just something that we don't absorb real well. When we look at family, the majority of people with a substance use disorder report that the family history of substance misuse was part of their family history. This that whole generational package. And I truly believe that, because I can look, my father was alcoholic, highly functioning alcoholic, very highly functioning, but he was alcoholic. And I look at the family he came from. My grandfather probably never drank in his entire life, but his brothers were all experiencing issues, and their children. I'm very fortunate. I did not, but if you look at that, my husband, 40 some years of recovery. Recovery happens, folks. Recovery is possible. Been that journey too. But we have a son, and I really take it more to that whole generational package as much as anything. He experienced a lot of problems. He's been in recovery for 15 or 20 years. But you see that over and over again. And you go back and you look at the grandparents or the great grandparents. Research indicates that genetics can play a significant role, accounting for about 60% of a person's susceptibility to substance use disorder. So these children, these 4 out of 20 children sitting in a classroom, we want to make sure that they've got the support to move through process and to be aware and to be protected. We can give them those tools. The National Association for Children of Addiction, which is known as NACOA, says that almost 39% to 69% of the children that are in child protective cases, it's due to substance misuse in the home, and that's from 2024. Generations United shared this information, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's not as current, but in 2025, they were pulling up data that they had gathered over time. 2002, 21% of the children removed from homes were due to substance misuse. By 2019, it had gone up to 40%. And I would guess, an estimated guess just based on experience. I've been in this field over 40 years, folks. That's a long time. I would guess that it's probably more 50 or 60% now. I also wanted to mention, because grandparents raising grandchildren, taking over that care, are often challenged because they have children with a fetal alcohol substance disorder, and FASD, we used to always use alcohol, was the primary one that we did, but we know it's all substances. And the thing that's great right now, though, is what we used to think was absolutely hopeless. We know that there are strategies for working with these children in a positive way. But just being aware, especially if you haven't had the education or the experience to think about it, it can be quite shocking when you take on the care of a child and you start to have some cognitive disorders, or, these are for the ones that aren't as severely impacted, that you don't see the visual, physical changes in them, but you see the way their brain is transferring in ways. We know that meth, one of the primary things that it impacts, especially if it's used in the first 3 to 4 months, is attachment disorder. It has a tendency for children to not be as open to being cuddled, to being handled, and they don't link with other children as they get into school quite as easy. But especially Dr. Ira Chasnoff, who is an absolute specialist in this internationally, has done some work with that, and they've come over the years with some strategies to really help the children through that. We know children who have a parent with substance use disorder, they're more likely to see and hear more fighting, witness more crime, suffer more from poverty. Even if someone in the family is working or there's an income coming in, it may not be being put to supporting the family, but it's being put for more use. They lose more stable relationships with caring adults because people that are using, the chaos that they're living in, those folks themselves may have been raised in the same kind of environment. They don't know how to build that relationship. They aren't there for that relationship. Children have lifetime trauma from growing up in the chaos. And I would say I probably had my share of it, but I was very fortunate that my dad was highly functioning, and the chaos wasn't quite like I know that many of the children and the families that I supervised, the services in outpatient, what it was like. They are at an increased risk for developing mental health and substance use disorders. I know this is probably not surprising to any of you, but just kind of putting this all in place. We know that there were family rules, and bless Claudia Black's heart for when she put these together, 25, maybe. This came out about the same time NACOA formed, and Claudia was one of the founders of it, along with Jerry Moe and Kathleen Brooks and some of the others. These family rules still exist. Don't talk. Keep the substance use disorder a secret by not talking about it to anyone. We don't want anyone outside the family to know. This is what ties in all the stigma that we are working so hard to overcome now. We know that stigma keeps people from getting to treatment. It keeps them from learning about what's going on in their life. It keeps them from addressing it. It keeps families from going for help because they don't want to be talking about it. They've been basically programmed. Don't talk about it. Don't trust. If you can't talk about it, if you can't share with it, you don't trust your feelings, the behaviors, the promises that come from each other or other people. The trust issue is big with disappointment. That is where my dad, bless his heart, and he would not be upset with me for sharing this because he was also a very strong, caring social worker. The disappointments of the things that he would promise, train ride. I just really lived near, Mattoon, Charleston. The train ran through here straight to Chicago. Oh, we'll go on that ride. We'll go to Champaign one of these days. You can do. First time I got on a train and took a ride was when I started working in this field. Then the don't feel. When you are in an environment where the relationships don't bond very well, where there's chaos, where you can't, there may be physical harm and danger. It may just be more emotional. But whatever's going on in that chaos and the people that are important in nurturing you are not available, you shut down, you turn off your emotions because your feelings of anger, fear, guilt, shame, resentment, and loss, sometimes it's just too much to bear. Hence, we have a lot of trauma that we're learning how to address in different areas, thank goodness. But don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. When my husband went into treatment, that hadn't been out very long, but it was starting to emerge, and I can remember writing it down in my Al-Anon book. The other thing that we need to take a look at, especially if we're working with people that are grandparents that have absorbed that parenting role or other kinship, and in my family, we've got both. I have a granddaughter that adopted her niece as an infant. The kinship care, there was no one else in place, and she had no children, and they are thriving, which is wonderful. But there was a reason for that. So if you look at, this came out of a project which I was actually part of back in the 1990s, and it was called Breaking the Chain, and we developed a book and then developed trainings that were done throughout the state of Illinois. And one of the things, as people were interviewed, some of the top people that were surfacing around dealing with children that are growing up in this environment, they need to have validation, comfort, and resolution. If the pain of the chaos that they're living in, and this is the same, I look at this and I'm going, it's also true for adults. This was focused primarily on children, but if there's chaos in your life and you're trying to share it, or you're trying to get some help, and you're trying to, well, Mom got so drunk last night she couldn't get up and give us breakfast, and you're telling the teacher that because you fell asleep on the desk and you're in trouble. And they go, oh, well, that's too bad, or they just shrug their shoulders, or you go, are you sure you aren't mistaken? No one believes me, it never happened. No validation at all. And we know it's important that there be validation. Comfort. I don't have anyone to keep me safe. If I can't trust the people that are supposed to be taking care of me because of their use, because of the things going on in our life, nobody's going to comfort me if they don't believe it, if if I can't be validated and I can't get any comfort, even if it's somebody shaking their head and saying, I'm sorry, if you need some direction, I'll be glad to help you find someone or some way. We aren't asking people to, this was kind of focused on teachers, aren't asking them to solve it, but at least recognize it and provide that support. Be that person that a child knows will help direct them in the right direction for help. So validated, comforted, and resolved. You're not going to get it resolved unless it's been validated or comforted. And as that came out and I was overseeing outpatient services, I shared that with counselors, especially newer ones coming into the field, over and over again, because when you're meeting with someone, you need to listen to them. Don't take over what they're saying. Don't put words in their mouth, but listen and then validate that, yes, I heard what you're saying. And the comfort comes from the fact that they're being recognized, and then you can give them some suggestions or help them find the resources they need. And that helps move them towards the resolution. And as we have seen, a lot of the efforts with trauma-informed care has evolved over the last few years, and we could have used it 25 years ago, let me tell you. I wanted to put grief and loss in here because it's an experience that's often not recognized or wasn't. Circle of Care has changed a lot of that, and we've tried very hard, and we keep promoting people understanding it, and other people are starting to, that grief and loss related to substance use disorder looks different, impacts different, and is often misunderstood, especially back when we were doing outpatient services. I used to look through files of clients and I would go, this is a symptom of substance use disorder, although it wasn't called that then. It's more grief, because I knew enough about grief to know that it just fit a different category, but people weren't looking at it yet. And it's been so exciting to me to know in the last 10 to 15 years, we've started looking at, there's grief and loss, and there's substance use disorder, and some of the signs and symptoms and the way people are reacting and the behaviors they're having and everything are very similar, but you need to look at them separately so that you can support this. And that's especially true with children too. So the Circle of Care on our website, we have a huge amount of resources. We're still doing training around the Circle of Care. And I encourage you, if you haven't been to any of it, watch for our menu for webinars, and we'll be doing some things. When kinship becomes the full-time parent, it can be due to a lot of things: child welfare or legal issues. A child was having social problems and needed to be moved into a different environment. Person is in the Department of Corrections or incarceration. One of my guardianships is for that very reason. And it's different. Some of the ways to address those, that's a whole nother training, but it's an important one. The death of a parent or caregiver, Circle of Care, one of the, I won't say purposes, one of the concerns that we were seeing, and I had had some discussions with someone that actually had the power to do funding, was when there's an overdose or a parent has died as a result of an accident due to using or something, children aren't supported oftentimes in the way that they should be. And I used to share, and I still share, one of my biggest fears is that you'll be waiting in line at Target or Walmart or wherever you live, whatever store everybody stops in after work or so is in, and there is an aunt or a grandmother that's got a 5 or 6-year-old or maybe even a 7-year-old school-age child with them, and they've had a parent that just overdosed. My fear is I'll be standing in line, and what I'm going to hear is a person a couple of rows down going, "Oh, that's Tommy. You know, his dad just overdosed this week. We all expected that. We knew that that was going to happen sooner or later." That just makes me sad because it's so powerful. Also, another thing that often changes the way children are being cared for is if their parents in the military. But more often than not, the data is showing that there's a correlation between alcohol and drug abuse or misuse and neglect on the part of the parents. And this came out of a document around some of the legal issues in custody and guardianship, grandparents raising grandchildren, and looking at the legal side of that and how you handle it. Is there any chat comments or anything? If there is, just pop it up there and we'll figure it out. Okay, here we go. These children are living in chaos. Somebody's reported them, or there's been a task force raid, or something's gone on, or maybe things are just falling apart. You're sitting at your desk. You get a phone call. And bam, you're suddenly a grandparent raising a grandchild, or an aunt raising your niece or nephew, or possibly even in some instances, a very good close friend, may not be blood relation, but is still family because of that caring relationship. I was sitting at my office in Springfield working for Prevention First when I got my first call. And your life changes. Did I suspect that it needed to happen? Absolutely. Did I worry about it when I would take off? Because I live in Charleston. Springfield's 2 hours away. I traveled quite a bit way back then. This has been a few years because those children are grown up now that we took on the guardianship of. But all these things, even though I had a pretty good feel of what was out there, what was going on, my dad had been a deputy director of DCFS back in the 70s. Yes, highly functioning alcoholic, as I said. I felt confident that we could take on the care of our granddaughters because we had them so much of the time anyway. But anxious, nervous, our whole life changed. I had a job that worked statewide. What would happen? I can remember driving home and calling a friend that's an attorney, saying, "What do we do now?" And they said, "Just write it out, get a hold of us if you need us, etc." And suddenly we were a grandma and a grandpa that had 2 girls. Your life changes. This is one of my most favorite books, and I stuck it in here because I was afraid if we got to the end, I wouldn't be able to share it with you. I was going to read you a session out of it, and then I realized I have given away more copies of this book, and I realized I just given away my last one. It's been out a while, but it's one of the most powerful books that I've seen to share with a child whose life has changed. And sometimes it's grandmas and grandpas. And what comes out of that oftentimes is relocation stress syndrome. So if you're working with families that are grandparents raising grandchildren or are providing kinship care, this is a more newer thing that we've looked at over the last few years, but it's called relocation stress syndrome, and it's physical or psychological and what it is disturbance from transfer from one place to another. So if a child is removed from the home, and sometimes under very stressful conditions, yes, you better believe not only is there grief, but there's relocation stress syndrome. And oftentimes that move is just the beginning, and then adjusting and grief are just beginning. At the time we had we gained guardianship and had it until they were 18 of our granddaughters. They were 5 and 9. And at that point in time, when children were removed, even though the person that removed them knew me, our children were not allowed to go into our home until it was gone through and they made sure everything was safe, because they knew the parents had been there, or the parent primarily had been there off and on. They just wanted to check and make sure. We had to stay all night that first night away from our house. So not only were those children removed, because I was in Springfield, they were in Charleston, my husband was here, and kind of was pulled in at that point, which is okay, thank goodness. But the process is very stressful for kids. I'm going, it was stressful for me, but we had to find someplace else to stay. So we stayed with my sister and her husband, who was chief of police at at the university here. They still came in and went through every room to check and make sure it was okay. I am sure that some of that has lessened, and some of it's probably also increased depending on the circumstances. But when you talk about relocation stress syndrome and children and what they go through, that's tough. And it's also tough oftentimes on the grandparents. Relocation stress syndrome is seen most common in young children under those circumstances, and then older seniors who are removed from their home and go to senior care, that kind of thing. But sometimes those two go together. You're the grandparent living in a senior neighborhood. Maybe you own your own house and everything, but maybe the guidelines for there is there's no children under a certain age. Well, then that means you have, if you're going to accept that responsibility of taking that child, you're going to have to move. So there's a lot of things that play into it that we need to be aware of as we work with these families and want to provide support, even if it's just on a community basis level of how do we help our neighborhoods connect and bring in these families. I am part of a Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Facebook page that's a national one. And almost every evening I sit down and read through several of the entries in there. And consistently what I see and what I hear is, especially if you're single and a senior, is feeling very isolated. And oftentimes you don't have the income to keep up where you were before because you now have absorbed a child. So we're going to really talk a little bit about that here in a minute. We know that family-centered services are important, and it's based on the belief that the best place for children to grow up is in a family. I think that this makes sense to probably most of you that are on here. Most effective way to ensure children's safety, permanency, and well-being. Family-centered services, placing children with kin when it's an appropriate environment. Provide services that engage, involve, strengthen, and support families. Boy, that slide jumped all over the place. Caregivers and kinship people can help lessen the impact of trauma for children, play a critical protective role, because oftentimes you're already in that role. You're that backup parent. They may have been sleeping on your couch off and on. You can provide stability. You can build their sense of self-worth and self-esteem because you know who they are. You know what they've been through. You know the culture. You're part of their culture in many instances, especially ethnicity. Regularly tell the child that you love them, share that they are loved no matter what. Your family, you're safe. And that's part of what that book that I was recommending talks about, is that whole safety issue that children need to feel. You can set firm, reasonable, age-appropriate boundaries within the culture and values that this child would have grown up in. And you can also be aware of their progress and setbacks. Grandparents and other relatives have a variety of daunting issues. You get that call and you're sitting there and you're going, in many instances, and I've talked, because I've done a lot of this in person and through webinars, but I have talked with people who have ended up being in this situation. You're going, I didn't know anything. I don't have any mental or emotional training. I'm in my 50s. I've already raised my kids. Things are different out there now. I wasn't prepared to go buy bedroom furniture, to buy all these things to take them in, et cetera, et cetera. We were very fortunate. We were able to do that. Although our first go around, there was subsidized monthly support for the girls, but we could have done it without it. Lack of financial preparation and need for diapers and formula. You're going, okay, we've removed the baby. We need to place them with you. And it's like, we'll be there in an hour. Okay. So how do you get the diapers? Where do you get the formula? What is it you need? Need for an appropriate car seat for the child. Car seats are so expensive. There are avenues to get them, or at least get some help with them. But when you get that call and you have to make that decision, that's not always something that you can access in 2 seconds. You may lack a crib or children's bunk beds. That's one thing that they were checking when we got our granddaughters. They wanted to see where they would sleep. What was the environment going to be like, et cetera, et cetera. And then, if you gain a child with health and medical concerns, especially if it's a child that's been prenatally exposed to substances, it can be overwhelming. Housing. Residents may have safety hazards. Caregivers may have disabilities. Relocation may be an issue. I just think it's important to be aware of these things. I'm looking at the time because I'm going to kind of flip through some of these, because I also want to talk about some of the other things that you can do that are really important and positive for all of this. Residents may not accommodate children. School enrollment could be an issue if you have to move. Living in senior housing, that's a tough one. And unable to relocate due to affordability. Health, the stress of caring for children can be overwhelming, and it is, especially if you have your own issues. I'm on my third go around, twice with the same child. Wouldn't trade her for the world, because thank goodness she is so good, and it's not overwhelming. However, it could be. Many children suffer from severe physical, emotional, behavioral problems, especially when they've been living in that chaos. Contributing factors include a lot of things: prenatal drug or alcohol exposure, sexual or physical abuse, feelings of abandonment, and relocation stress syndrome. We go back up. I'm going to promote Liesel's the sex and family trafficking again. You don't know what's been going on totally in that child's environment. So I encourage you, join us in her webinar, because she's got really good information that those of us that have been around a while and are older probably haven't known about. It's just now becoming something we really need to be aware of. There's the legal issues. Many relatives provide care for children without legal custody or guardianship. Amen. 1 out of every 10, or 10 for every one child that's in legal guardianship, is being taken care of by someone that doesn't have that. Litigation is costly. Even if you take that child, you're willing to do it, it costs money. We paid for one of the guardianships. I know what it cost us. And I felt like we were very lucky that it didn't cost more. Many relatives do not pursue custody or guardianship for financial reasons, and this is a biggie, and I understand this because we had a situation, still do a little bit, of, if you anger the parent, are you going to lose your relationship with the children should the children be returned to the parents? It's a balancing act. Okay, I see the question about relocating schools. We just came up to the school thing. There are several different ways. When we had our first granddaughters, even though it was a school I graduated from, my kids graduated from, my grandkids started going there, and we had some issues, but it's been a number of years ago. We basically were being evaluated, no free lunches or anything like that because our income was too high. Well, we know now that there would have been other, in this situation, in this day and age, it would have been different. But the McKinney-Vento Act and services are students who are not in the legal custody of the child welfare system and are living with kin. It could be grandparents, it could be aunt, it could be uncle, may qualify for the McKinney-Vento services. And under this law, children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence are eligible for services. In other words, if they're with someone that's couch jumping, or if they've been moved out of their parents' care and the couch jumping into grandparents or kinship care, they would qualify, most likely qualify for being admitted to the school. Every school system has a McKinney-Vento person, representative, that can help people through that. So if you go to register and they say, but you don't have any proof of residence, the child hasn't been in the area long enough, et cetera, you ask to talk to that person who will help that child get in, because every child has a right to it. Child who qualifies can receive the following: immediate enrollment, continued enrollment of their school of origin if that's in their best interest, access to academic and extracurricular activities, and free school meals. And oftentimes that also includes some of the services for activities and things approved. TANF, temporary assistance to needy families. I remember when that went into place. There are child-only grants and regular TANF grants. And for grandparents, I mean, we could afford to take our grandchildren in. Not that we had lots of extra money, but we could afford to do it. With the granddaughters that we had, they went through foster care time, and then we were placed as permanent guardianship. So we had a monthly subsidy. But with the one that was done voluntarily, we had no money coming in from the outside, and yet we were senior citizens. So I didn't know about the child-only grant that was part of TANF until I was talking with someone at the senior center. As part of my job, I was checking in with them on the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren program and gathering information about this because I was on my second go-round. And they asked me if we'd applied for that. And so regardless of the grandparents or other relative caregivers' income, child-only grants provide a small grant each month. At the time we were doing it, which isn't that many years ago because the child's just now turning 9, the grant was like $206 a month, but it was $206 a month that we didn't have coming in otherwise. Now, when I looked it up the other day for Illinois, because every state's child-only fee is different. Some of them are much higher than Illinois, because $200 was about the lowest. I've seen a chart of that, but not in the last 2 or 3 years. But I did look up Illinois, and it was up around 300 and something for one child, and then it's prorated as you add more children from the same family. You automatically qualify to receive medical assistance. If the caregiver is working, they may also qualify for at least help with their daycare. And eligible children can receive that monthly assistance until they reach the age of 18. And you don't have to be a legal guardian, but you have to have proof that that child's living with you. And we had to do that, even though we had a guardianship, which I thought was kind of interesting. We still had to have somebody write a document and sign off on it and everything and have it notarized that the child was living with us. There's also the extended family support programs. These assist caregivers, family, kinship caregivers, grandparents who are caring for the children, but they aren't part of the welfare system. And they can help obtain guardianship, give you, they aren't going to pay for it, but they can help obtain it, give you some legal direction. In some instances, they may be able to give you a quote short grant. They can help in obtaining the child-only grant and the entitlements. They can help enroll in children, or at least get you in connection with the right person if you're struggling with getting your children switched into the schools. Referrals to other services, and in some instances, cash assistance to obtain guardianship to meet the child's basic needs. This is not an ongoing monthly. This is not TANF. It's not ongoing monthly. With our last guardianship that was a voluntary one, the parents were not available. And when I was learning about TANF, we were also given a $200 grant, so to speak, to help pay for the guardianship. I mean, that was a drop in the bucket to what the legal fees were, but it was there and it was available and it helped. It was wonderful. To inquire about these services, it's interesting. You call this 800 number, and these slides will be sent to you. You can have them. I've got a lot I want to cover in the next half an hour, so I'm going to kind of troop through here. And you say, and I've been in several trainings, just recent trainings that recommend you say this: I'm caring for my relative's child. I've been caring for them for more than 14 days. The child is not being abused or neglected, but I need help. I would like to be referred to the Extended Family Support Program, and they will make that link for you. You can call the hotline number and they will do that. The Family Advocacy Centers are the liaison with the Illinois Department on Aging and DCFS. There are advocacy centers, 30 of them in Illinois. You can look those up, just go online, and they can help give you some guidance. They do a lot of support groups and stuff too. They're there to help you. They do parenting classes. They can help you figure out some of the tutoring needs that you may have. Whoops. The Department on Aging's Grandparents and Other Relatives Raising Grandchildren program, that title's changed in the last few years, offers information to caregivers about available services. It's very similar to the other assistance to caregivers in gaining services. This is basically who led us. I was there for work, and it ended up being personal information around getting to the TANF program. It depends. I want you to know that not every senior center, ours here is called Lifespan. They don't offer every single one of these listed, but they are funded to do what helps support families. Some people, almost all the offices that I've talked to and know about, do support for grandparents or kinship when there's somebody to facilitate it. That's been a problem in our areas. But they give you direction. I felt like we got a lot of really help. Respite care in some areas, they can even help facilitate for caregivers to get some temporary relief. Not every one of the centers is going to be able to provide this, but check with them because there's even more extension. Some of them will do some kind of summer camps for a week or two for the grandchildren to give the caregivers a break, that kind of thing. The grandparents raising grandchildren offer a lot of other short-term caregiver emergency. The local area agencies on aging, which is really what we were just talking about. It's not the advocacy centers, but it's the ones that come through the senior centers. They coordinate services. So what's next to assist kin care? Folks, we're coming on at National Grandparents' Day, and is quite a few activities coordinated around that, and it's September 13th, 2026. So keep an eye out for us, because our newsletter and on our webpage we will have some information, and our Facebook. Join us on Facebook. We will be providing some more of that information and some things. There'll be toolkits. There has traditionally been little videos that Generations United put out that you can access to give you ideas of things to do with that. The Family First Prevention Series Act in 2018 was an important federal act because it provided funding to expand support for families before court involvement's needed, prioritize, say, family-based settings for children, ensure the quality of residential treatment for children and youth, and strengthen support for families through other avenues. I think it's important that we look at what's out there, because oftentimes when we talk about children being placed in kinship care or in regular formal foster care, we get frustrated when we know that the goal is to return that child home. And in most instances, it is in some form or another. And part of that goes back to this act, recognizing that it's important. And it is important, but it gets confusing to people to understand. Well, why would they do that? Well, because there's a process. There are laws in place that say these steps have to be taken before a child is not placed back. Several provisions of the Family First Act became effective back in October of 2021. Illinois actually started theirs at the end of that October, enforcing and looking at the Family First Act as things go through court. Then came this, and I'm going, where was this when we were assumed the guardianship of our great-granddaughter on our own? Illinois Kinship in Demand, KIND Act. It was a landmark act. It was signed into law February 5th, 2025, and it took effect in July of 2025. It's based on the research showing that kinship placements reduce trauma from family separation, decrease placement disruptions, improve social, behavioral, mental health, and educational outcomes, and shorten the time to permanence when guardianship or adoption is available and recommended. That was made pretty clear. It allows family members in kinship care where it couldn't be done before because you just couldn't afford to absorb that child or take on that child, or you do, and it pushes you into oftentimes a level of maybe not poverty, but close. Your resources just aren't there. You're living from whatever check that is maintaining you each month. Families taking on the responsibility of children were not being subsidized the way formal foster care was. Huge difference in the amounts of money that were made available. And this was recognized and looked at. And one way to help make things healthier for both families, for the kin providing the care and for the children involved in it, was this process. The KIND Act enhances the welfare system and provides improved support for relatives raising children, equalizes payments to relatives with the rate provided to traditional foster parents. That's huge, folks. I've been in both roles. That's huge. Helping youth in care maintain connections with their families. It helps do that when it's appropriate. And it helps tailor services and supports to kinship families. This was a big part of it. We know that foster care, formal foster care, have to go through training, and that was part of supposedly the rationale of, well, they're formally trained, they've got their certificate, and they're being paid more. The family just kind of got, well, if you'll take them, good, because that relieves us. I'm sorry, folks, that sometimes that's just the way I feel, even though I'm in big support of DCFS. Equal financial support. Certified relative caregivers are eligible for the same financial benefits as licensed foster caregivers, including subsidized guardianship, even when you have guardianship that's gone through the system. It's important. I wanted to read that again so that you knew that. The caregiver certification creates separate, less burdensome certification standards for relatives. It's not as intense, it's not as, well, it recognizes that the relatives already know a great deal about those children and the family and the things that they need to know that they might get through their formal foster care certification. It allows those people providing those services to be certified to care for youth that are in DCFS care. It recognizes, yes, we know that you can do it. We know that you're trained. We know that you can provide the services that are very important. And as of May 2026, it's not very long ago, over 340 youth are living with caregivers that have earned that certification under the new program. And it's going to be interesting to see how that keeps going, because with that certification, you gain that financial stability. Oops. Yeah, okay. The other thing I wanted to mention that's out there, behavioral and mental health resources, Beacon. You may have heard of it, you may have seen it advertised, you may be totally aware of it, behavioral health care and ongoing navigation. It's a resource that is now in place for Illinois youth and families so that you can learn about behavioral health services that might be near you, or what kind of state-funded programs the child in your care, your child or a child in your care, might be eligible for. And you go on Beacon and you can navigate that website and find out where those resources are. There's also the Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services Family Support Program, which provides information around intensive mental health services. And this is for youth that have really serious issues going on and require a higher level of care, maybe possibly even outside the home. Okay, I see another chat. I don't know the answer to that. Liz, that's a good question. I would hope so. And if they're being, yeah, I don't know. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to have to check that out before I do any more of this. Also, real quickly, I want to share there's something new that started July 1, which was the beginning of this month. There were some pilot sites around the state. Department of Children and Family Services has began Forward Together, which is a new approach. It's based on the SAFE model. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail with this, but the goal is using communities that provide, well, there's some family assessment going and everything, but keeping the family together and helping provide them with like mentors and role models. There are several pilot programs that I know have been going on in Illinois. Chicago has a pretty big one. And there's one down in our area that I just found out about. When we look at all this, there's two sides. We have children that are in kinship care or being placed outside the home. The goal is for any of them, basically, if you ask someone, is going to say to get them back with their family. But the goal really is keeping those children in a safe and caring environment, whichever way it goes. And I just wanted to share some of these things about if you are involved where you're working with the possibility of the children going back, indications that the parent is not, and this comes from Generations United, some of the better stuff, indications that the parent is not ready to assume the responsibility of taking care of their child may include, they may not show up for the scheduled family time, forgetting to attend an important event such as a medical appointment. I will go on the side of the parent and say, when you're early in recovery, come to my early parenting and early recovery workshop one of these days, and you're looking at what's going on with them. I mean, with post-acute withdrawal and with HALT, which is part of recovery, no matter how dedicated and committed you are to that recovery journey, there are times that you just have memory lapses. But is this a pattern? Are those things not seen as important? What's their response when you ask them why they didn't show up? If they ignore the child during the family visit time, they're probably not ready to assume that responsibility. They may want to, but they're not ready. Are they reading their emails or on social media during the visit? Are they having unreasonable expectations of their child? And sometimes I saw that in my experiences of these families of doing this, is having unreasonable expectations. You want your child to seem perfect. And so you encourage them during those visits to, and sometimes it sounds like criticism, do things that you want them to kind of show off so you look like you're that good parent. We also know some children can be very distressed after family time with their parents, and there can be several reasons. Confusion about family unification plan. Kids need age-appropriate information about a reunification plan. Feeling guilty about leaving the caregiver at home. Oh, I'm so close to that caregiver. They're so sad. I don't know if I can leave them, even if things are going well with the parent. Feeling guilty that they may have caused the separations. Why am I going back here if, did I do it? And basically not being old enough to understand the unification process. And a grandparent or caregiver can explain that as best they can, but they need to work with whoever may be making that final decision too. And in some instances, it may be them, and use age-appropriate words. We have a video, it's actually a couple of years out now, series that you may sign on if you sign in to be on our mailing list and things go on the website. You have to have permission to watch this, but Dr. Crumley is phenomenal and he retired from doing kinship family care related to substance use disorder and put together this program. There's workbooks, there's lectures that you can read and stuff, but you have to be granted permission to go into that. Long story there, and it's because of his copyrights, but we have that ability to link you into that if you go sign in and then request it on our website. This is one of the pieces out of one of his books that I thought I would put in parental roles for birth parents. If you're working with families, you can use this graph, and he actually gives you some of the guidelines for that. Look at the different roles a birth parent can have and competencies that come with each, ranging from one to the other. Circle where you believe the birth parent currently fits for their role in caring for the child on the scale below, and then work from that. Put a star where you would fall on the scale in the ideal world, and how much would you like the birth person to be involved. It's just a tool, and it's one of many, many, many ones that are in his resources. But I think it kind of sometimes gives you some guidelines, and where do you start? Like over here, maintains contact with the child, and the parental connections, phone calls, emails, and letters. That's a start. And how do you start moving through that process? It's not an overnight, and sometimes it goes pretty fast. And I think that's part of the issue. This is just some things, if you're working toward that, if a child may be returning home, what can you, as that grandparent or caregiver, provide? And how can you assist that? I've been down this road, I've done it. And luckily, I amazingly seem to be doing real similar, because I did it before Generations United came out with this information. We just seemed to fit too well together. I just gave us both credit because I've experienced this. Vital papers such as birth certificates, social security card, health records, all those things, immunization records, contacts with dentists, physicians, and things. If you can document those, if you have a record of those, it helps the parents, and it helps support that child being safely moved back to where the goal is. And sometimes, as that caregiver, as that guardian, it's hard to do emotionally and just physically doing it. But we also have to keep in mind the goal is for that child to be in the healthiest and safest environment it can be. And a parent can't take over that role without the support of the people who've been caring for their child. Dates and notes about any psychological or screenings, therapeutic treatment plans, if there have been any, school records, contact numbers, who were their teachers, if they had an IEP, do you have a copy that you can make sure you provide? Keep notable classwork, projects, even if it's preschool, even if it's something out of daycare. Save some of those things, especially if there is an indication that child may go to the parent, so that there's a link there, so that they have something that joins them together. Record and picture, including developmental milestones. As a grandparent or kinship care, you're probably doing that. Make sure that you keep those around and know that you can pass that on. What are activities your grandchild or kin child participate in? What do they like? What are their friends' name and contact information? The linkages you can keep are important. What are the daily life events that they like to do? What times a day? What kinds of family time have you done with that child in your role? And then what have been the dates of family time with the parent and child and things that you saw that were supportive? Observations made during and after visits could be important information where a unification plan is concerned. And that may be even along with the social worker that's managing that, or the CASA worker. What observations can you provide that can help them make things better? This is one thing, I don't know if, let me see, I'm going to pull this down. Oops, maybe not. We'll go from here. This is one thing I did when at 5 years old, our great granddaughter went to live with her dad and his partner, who became his wife, and their new baby. It was hard on her. He was not willing to do a long-term reunification. He just really didn't understand it. I'm here. I've been around for a year. I've seen her. It's time to move her. And that was really hard on her because there wasn't the transition. Luckily, the bonus mom is wonderful with kids. They are no longer together, and she still spends part of her time, half time with that bonus mom and half time with us. So we're in kind of a odd situation. But what I did to help that transition, and I still do it almost 4 years later, is I had lots and lots of pictures of things that we'd done and of her as a child. And luckily they were both very agreeable to that. We didn't live in the same town, but just 10, 15 miles apart. Every week I sent an envelope that had one or two of those pictures in it. And I would put a colored card along with some stickers. I would buy stickers and just cut those sheets in strips and send it with stickers. Or I'd send a coloring page. I'd rip out a coloring page and fold it up and put it in there and send it. Takes a stamp and an envelope, a photo or childlike picture if you don't have any photos, a tiny small sheet of stickers, and the note card for them to put it on. Because if you haven't had that child or aren't used to having kids around, you aren't going to like stickers all over your furniture. So give them something to put it on. And make sure that the parent, oops, let me see if I can do this. Make sure the parent understands and is okay with you doing this. But if you explain it right, this will create it's not that I want to take away you building a relationship, but it'll help them know that we're linked together and this move is okay. and understanding that, and it's worked well. And I went from doing 2 letters a week to the, well, she was almost 5, to the 5-year-old. We're down to 1 letter a week. But what's interesting is she has a 4-year-old, just turned 4, bonus sister, and there is now a little one that just turned 2. And even though the mom and dad are not together and dad's really not in the picture, we still share because she's got that strong relationship with that person, bonus mom, and those 2 children. They get letters and pictures too, because she was getting hers and I didn't want to stop it. It's something that I think is important to her, even though we see her on a regular basis, and now she's here 2 and 3 days a week. But she asked me if her sister, that's now just turned 4 a couple of years ago, if I'd send her an envelope because she really liked it. So we got to that point. And then just recently, I've started sending the little boy that just turned 2 an envelope with stickers and a picture. And I've been there when they opened them before. I don't, because I mailed them. They feel really important. And that 2-year-old's excited about it as my almost 9-year-old great granddaughter was when I started it. It's those linkages that make memories, and the fact that things between bonus mom and dad have not gone well, yet my great granddaughter still feels that need to be a part of that family. She should be. She loves those kids and the bonus mom. There's that linkage there. That's one of those linkages. And you can do things that make it easier. Now, sometimes stepping back and you turning that child over, it's hard. It's really, really hard, even though you really don't have any choice. We didn't fight it because the attorneys that we saw said he's done everything right, but we had no say about how that unification happened. And that's okay. I understood that he just didn't get it. He thought that they had their little family and it was going to be okay, not realizing the impact that it had on her. But she fared well, so they didn't totally mess that up. And we're all just fine. And she's fine. She's a very resilient girl. Things are going well for her. But part of that's because I was lucky enough to have the training to understand some of the things that needed to be done. So if you're working with families, kinship care, help them understand sometimes you have to step back and keep healthy or as healthy as possible linkages in order to support that child because they are the primary. The one thing that I wanted to share, there's a whole group of books and things in here that are good resources. But if you're in this situation or you're working with a family that is, Jerry Moe put out this book, and I know there's someone on here that uses it just as much as I have over the years. Phenomenal book to give you some resources and ways to handle things in working with children where substance use disorder is the reason that primary reason that they're not with the parents. And it's came out, what, it's been over 10 years. I know it's been longer than that, but it's great. It's still available. I advise you to get it if you're working in this environment. Here's another great one that I love. So you're raising your grandkids. This isn't just where there's been substance use disorder, but it's an excellent book with some really good information on working through that as a grandparent or kinship caregiver. Another good one. This one is a little more in depth, but it's a good book. The others are a little easier to read, and I was able to apply them easier. Great book for children to help understand substance use disorder and the reasons that may be in place for them being separated from their family. What makes a family? This kind of helps kids go through. A family is people that care and love you. The kissing hand is a standard. It's always good. It's been used in the curriculum that NACOA puts out. my family, your family, what do blended families look like? And oftentimes, how do you manage those, especially when there ends up being a partner for each of the people that becomes to this, my family, your family. Great book. It has some work pages in it, coping with family changes. This is great for someone that's working with families, and resources that you can use depending on the age of the child. At some ages older, they can certainly do these themselves. What does family mean? And maybe it's grandparents raising grandchildren or aunts adopting babies. And that is my sharing. Probably more than you wanted to know, but I think it's important that we recognize the role that our family members, however you define family, have in helping our children either stay permanently safe in that environment or return back with the parents and still have you in their life. So I'm going to tell you all to enjoy your weekend, to enjoy your Thursday. We will, let's see.
Nancy, I
Yeah,
was not able to put the link in the
I
chat
just
for the
was.
evaluation. It's only letting me send it to you, not to everyone. So I guess they'll get it in the email, in the follow-up email. Or
Yeah,
how do you want me to?
yeah, make sure we do
Oh,
that. That'll probably go out next week. There's also going to be a survey pop up here. If you could do it, that would be great. It's just a quick 7-question one. So if you have any questions, let me know, because there's nothing that's solid anymore. It's all this stuff is flexing in DCFS, new stuff they're doing, new stuff they're implementing, things that they're working toward. And if you're not in part of that system, it's an interesting journey, but it's not all bad, folks. We're learning. So I encourage you to ask any questions that you need to, how to get a hold of us. Have a good weekend and be safe.